Why is it that this is a unit which is important for you to understand the role of HR within an organization? So, in the first part of the unit, what we did primarily was to focus on, getting into things which are related to, which are related to, what is the definition of HR, the concept of HRM, how it originated. We went into a bit of a history in terms of understanding what was the concept and background into human resources management, what is the HR process in general, and then we also looked at some of the key timelines with regards to the developments which have happened over the decades in terms of how this field or this as a subject area has essentially evolved. Now, today we are going to be focusing on studying the second learning outcome. And this is going to look at understanding the functions of human resource management. So when we talk about functions, functions of HR, what could be the functions of HR? So if you look at this from this point of view, that in the first part, we had understood history, background, why it came about and how this field is relevant for business or any organization. But now in this learning outcome today, what we're going to do is go deeper into understanding what is HRM. So here, we're not going to be overall superficially looking at or getting into HRM, but we are going to get into detailing of what is the function of HRM. And here, if we look at the approach of or wear a hat of the HRM department, that means I am somebody who works within the department. That is what we are going to be looking at from a day-to-day responsibility point of view of what the person actually does in this role. So if I'm an HR manager, or if I'm an HR assistant, or if I'm an HR officer, if I'm a training and development officer within the HR department, or if I'm a payroll manager within the HR department, if I'm somebody who looks after employee relations with unions and things like that, and I have that role of maintaining the industrial relations with different unions or different side of organizations that the employees are entitled to work with or get, let's say, advice and recommendations from. And if I work within that role, that is what we are going to be looking at studying today in Learning Outcome 2. So here, we need to put on our hats of being an HR manager and then look into areas like if I'm dealing on a day-to-day basis with recruitment and selection, training and development, I look after employee welfare, somebody who's the manager who looks after benefits, incentives, compensation, emoluments, remuneration, as we call it, performance appraisal side of things, look at law and compliance in terms of legislation and laws. We look at how there could be somebody in the HR department in large companies, specifically when I talk about tourism and hospitality management, and I look at airlines, you would generally see there will also always be a person in the company within the HR department whose role is to look at strategic areas. That means long-term areas. How is the employee recruitment strategy shaping up? How many people actually end up joining and leaving the organization? How long they stay? How long what are the reasons why they leave? Or in some cases, when you look at, places like the front office or the front desk in hotels, you generally see there's a lot of turnover. That means people come, work as a reception, work at the reception duties, but they end up leaving in 2-3 months because the job is quite stressful. It is quite, quite a lot of hard work. And that is where the strategic part of the HR comes in to say, how do we look at making that job much more simpler or, simplify that role so that people can actually stay within the organization? Because in this sector, a lot of research has been done, and what the research tells us is, I would want to quote a report, but I think if I can remember correctly, 2-3 years back, there was a report which was done by, the tourism body in the UK, and they suggested that, if any hotel or any sort of an organization working within the THM sector, travel, hospitality, and management, they on an average spend 3,560 pounds in terms of training the employee from the time they join the organization. And if they end up leaving, then this is the money which cannot be recovered because this is being spent on training and time and effort, which is to get the employee to understand their role and then obviously deliver at a level which is requiring the which is required as per the job description. So in some cases, you'll have roles within the organization which will be responsible for planning side of things, yearly meets for employees, appraisals, and they are all a part and parcel of, this particular learning outcome of understanding what is the process of, human resources management. So when we talk about process, we will be looking at this particular process of human resources management, and that would be important for us to understand. Now, let's also take a look at one video in particular, which talks about, these societal, what is the role of HRM and how does society see the role of HR working within an organization. Let me play this short video for getting some idea.
Pick it up with HR. You know what HR is, but do you know what exactly HR does? Human resource management, often shortened to HRM or HR, is the practice of recruiting, hiring, deploying, and managing an organization's employees. A company's HR department acts as a bridge between a company and its employees, facilitating a healthy relationship between employees and upper management, and it creates and implements policies to help everyone do their jobs. There are 4 kinds of HRM objectives. Societal objectives aim to meet the ethical and social needs of the company, addressing issues like equal opportunity and pay. Organizational objectives strive for efficiency, including employee hiring, training, and retention. Functional objectives focus on ensuring all of HR's resources are allocated to its full potential. And finally, personal objectives seek to support the personal goals of each employee, like offering education or career development opportunities. Almost all areas of HRM have software that automates HR processes. Recruiting in particular has seen an enormous growth in software platforms and systems that match candidates with employers and then manage the rest of the hiring process. Other services offered by HRM software vendors include payroll, administration, and employee records services. Smaller companies often offer affordable, low-maintenance, cloud-based HR systems. Larger businesses, on the other hand, tend to prefer in-house HR systems, which allow for more control. Aside from the technical responsibilities, HRM reinforces office culture and helps keep employees happy. They say a company is only as good as its employees, which makes HRM an essential part of maintaining a successful business. What HR software does your company use? Let us know in the comments and be sure to give this video a like.
So as you can see, obviously the video talks about, what is the role of HRM, what is HR specifically when we talk about it from a departmental perspective. So essentially here, what we would want to do is understand that role of HR in the discussions using our presentation, simply because this is the bit that we want to, look at today from a point of view of, understanding the detailing that we get to see when HR department works within the organization. So from my point of view, what I would want to do is get into a bit more detail with regards to understanding, the process of HR. If you recall, this was a flowchart which I put forward in the first slide as well. But this is like a bit of a summary. We are going to go into detail today of what is this process. And we're going to look at each of the individual areas that the lady talked about in terms of recruitment, selection, training, compliance, legislation, relations, and then finally looking at rewards and benefits. Is that okay? Now, one of the other things that we want to also put and keep our sight on is the strategic nature of HR. So when I talk about the strategic nature of HR, what we are looking at is here list of certain practices which are now generally acceptable as processes which are part and parcel of every HR department. What do I mean by that? That if I look at an HR department, I would generally, what would I see as a chief executive, as a CEO, or as an outsider, or as somebody who works within the company? I would see the HR does these kind of strategic roles. That means this is the essence of the department altogether. One, they look at employee management. They look at talent management. Talent management means every company's goal is to retain the best employees in the organization. They don't want them to leave. If they leave, then the employee or the organization suffers because there's a deficiency or a gap which gets created because the employees left the organization, and they need to get somebody on, which would mean that that employee would need to be trained, given time to adjust, and then before it starts performing, you would see a bit of a gap where the organization will lose performance, maybe business, or even in some cases efficiency. So talent management is an important area when you want to retain employees within the organization. You look at development. Here, the development could be, the lady was talking about different types of systems. Now, if you have a company and you have a number of employees working and they are used to doing the jobs, but they do it manually. Now, one of the things that you would need to look at as a top person in the organization would be to see how I can automate some of these processes by employing software or introducing new technology, and that would be looking at training and development aspect of it. How do I make my department more up to date, more in tune with modern times, and which is able to function more effectively? And that would be the area of development. Sometimes you also look at development wherein for example, if I'm stepping into a role and that requires me to have negotiation skills, because that is a role which involves dealing with partners and vendors, my company would decide that, okay, this is a training, although the person is going to pick up and use his experience to do so, but it's best that we put the person through some sort of a training so that he or she is able to start on that role more effectively. So in those cases, areas of development are identified, and training and development becomes a key part of the review system. And then most employees are put onto some sort of training and development, from time to time. Performance management, in order to enhance performance of the employees, to ensure that they are doing well and they are, achieving the goals and objectives. That is another area which is directly related to performance appraisals and management of employees to check on their output. Are they meeting the description of job role which has been given, or are they the job design which has been done? Does it take into account skills and attribute which the person has, the experience the person has, and is it commensurate to what the person tries to then deliver for the company? And then processes of efficiency, things like when you look at organizations, imagine if you have an organization which has multiple branch offices or has operations in different countries, then connecting those offices, use of software like ERP, enterprise resource planning software, or cloud management softwares which allow decision making to be effective, centralized, data collection to be centralized, retrieval of data to be centralized, that would make the department more efficient. And in those cases, you would generally see somebody in the department is always working on efficiency. Now, if I look at 20, 25, 30 years back, most payroll and salary slips were printed on dot matrix printer. I don't know whether you've seen dot matrix printer or not, DMP as we used to call it. And that used to take a lot of time. So on 31st or last day of the month, if 200 salary slips have to be printed, this printer used to print, and it was all a manual process. But now if you look at efficiencies wise, there are lots of softwares available. All these are electronically generated at a click of a button. And they can email these salary slips across to the employees just by pressing a button, and that allows efficiencies to be brought in. So there are people who will work within the IT side or IT and information side within the HR, sometimes in very big companies. You look at a hotel like Marriott, or a big airline like Qantas, which has millions and millions of customers. They maintain a database of that. If they have to send out a newsletter of a new promotion that they're going to do, maybe launch in April or June this year, to say, first, we are introducing a special flight at discounted rates. Imagine the amount of work they will have to do if it was all paper driven. But nowadays data is captured, and if they have to do a newsletter or a marketing newsletter, it'll all be efficiently done through the use of software. And then who measures HR? Who measures the output of HR? And also if people are essentially meeting the goals and criteria set by the management. In those cases, you would generally see that there are formal appraisal techniques in place which allow you to look at HR's role in the overall perspective of the organization. And we use certain tools like the balanced scorecard or MBO, management by objectives, to be able to assess the role of what the HR department is playing in the overall growth of the organization, in the overall scheme of organization. scheme of things which are running the organization. So this generally tends to be the entire role of HR and the processes which HR puts in place in a nutshell when we look at, this particular learning outcome. Is that okay?
Yep.
Now, because we have some key terms that we need to look at in the indicative content, so what I've done is I've created individual slides on, talking about each of these terms. Now, it's not difficult for me to explain, and one of the things which I mentioned at the start of this session to you is what we need to do is wear the hat of an HR. Today, I am, for the next hour or so, working as an HR manager for UK Versity, and you are working as an HR manager for, say, XYZ organization. And what we're going to do is discuss what does the HR do from that aspect, and then cover some bits of it. Now, one of the first things that I do as an HR manager is I do recruitment selection. When a new vacancy comes up, I need to advertise the vacancy. I need to make sure that there's a job description for it. I look at designing the job description, which is called job design. And at some stage, I look at going to agencies that we have retained to be able to say, okay, we have a requirement for a healthcare lecturer. Can you look at sending us a few CVs or shortlist a few candidates? And this process that we are going to go through as me giving directions to the agency to say, a recruitment firm to say, can you help me shortlist a few CVs and help me conduct some interviews for a healthcare lecturer, would be the process of recruitment selection. But you go through this in a very structured way. You start with a job design, you go to creating a job description. At the end of it, once the job description is ready, you decide on what the package will be, what is the benefits going to be, and then bring it in line with the organizational requirement, then advertise the job vacancy, either through the intranet, through employees, through newspaper, through bulletin boards, through the internet, or through an agency that you speak to externally that you have retained on your organization. And then the agency starts to look at sending you CVs, shortlisting of candidates, at some stage followed by interview, and the interview leading to interview finalist. And then once the offer letter is issued, at some stage, the offer letter gets accepted by the relevant candidate, and that leads to selection and the person joining the organization. So here, the process of recruitment and selection is something which HR does pretty much throughout the year. It is not something which is a one-off activity. Employees join, employees leave, employees have to be fired, have to be made redundant. New employees have to be hired to augment the capacity of the organization. So in those cases, the process of recruitment and selection is a continuous one. Second thing that we look at is training and development. So when we talk about training and development is a key aspect of the HR part, because I might want to recruit somebody who has negotiation skills, leadership skills, skills on making contracts or, managing employees. But sometimes you're faced with a situation that you don't get the ideal candidate in the market. And when organizational requirements change, internally, the organization would need to do some training for all the employees to ensure that we are all singing from the same songbook. Now, example, if a company undergoes change in branding, now, if the branding changes, what is the mission and the vision of the organization? What are the tagline of the organization? How the logo has changed? Why the color has been chosen? Now, these are bits and pieces which the organization will have to train its employees internally, because this is a major change which the organization has introduced. And what it wants to do now is that as employees, you are the first brand ambassadors of any organization. So if I go out and I represent my company, what I would need to be able to do is essentially make sure that I am aware of, the reasons of the change. What does it depict? How does it, make a difference? Things like that, or questions related to that. And this would require training. So normally you would see HR department would get into a bit of a training schedule, department by department, section by section. They would start to train the employees to make them understand that why this brand change is happening, what is it for you, how is it going to affect the customers, how is it going to affect the image of the company. If you get questions asked, then what kind of answers you should be able to give. And, in some cases, this is how it will look like as a change environment. And there the HR needs to get the buy-in from the employees. So this process, if you imagine change of branding in an organization, or a merger or acquisition which happens, or in general, if a company introduces a new software which is maybe like CRM software, like Salesforce is introduced because the sales operations and the finance operations of the company have to be managed, and a lot of people need access to it. They introduce this new software. They will have to ensure that all people working within that department or people making use of that particular information from sales and finance would need to be trained on this software. And that is where you would see training and development, upskilling, building new skills, making them current with the legislation and skills or information they need to be aware of, is all going to be a part and parcel of being done in the organization through conducting effective training programs and activities. Is that okay?
Yes.
Then we look at employee welfare. One of the things, what is welfare? One of the important things that I look at is if I work for a company, I want to look at working in a place which is safe. It is safe and healthy for the from a point of view of the environment. I feel comfortable working within the organization. I like the ethos, the standards, and in general, the people which work within the organization. So that is where employee welfare comes in. So when I look at welfare, the other aspect of welfare is benefits and services which I get from the company. If I fall sick, if I want to take a day off, or in some cases, in my case, if I look at achieving my targets, then what are the benefits or the welfare which the company is doing to be able to retain me or distinguish my service or maybe value my service that I do for the organization. And all that bit is encompassed under what is called welfare. Sometimes you would see HR will play a part in delivering some of these programs or trainings, essentially, which will be updating them on what are the updates which the company is doing in terms of maintaining good employee welfare within the organization. That means to say that they are looking at the specific needs and concerns of the workforce or the staff. And in those cases, if they feel that this is missing, or for example, if I look at welfare, and I give you an example, is that when the business started, it was a small company, maybe of 10 people. But today, after 5 years, if you look at, there are 50, 60 people in the organization. And we generally feel that during lunchtime, we don't have a place where we can go and actually, have a sit down or have proper meals or go outside and sit down. So if a suggestion is given to the HR to say, can we look at, maybe a facility wherein there could be a restaurant within the office, or we could have canopies, etc., like that to be set up in the garden, so that when people want to take a bit of a break or have a lunch break, they could actually go out and spend a bit of time under those canopies or in that restaurant within, if there is a probability it can be done. So in those cases, what is happening is, it is from a welfare perspective that the organization will get this as a suggestion and then look into it, because all employees are asking for it. Sometimes you see in organizations like software development organizations, they even have things and facilities like washrooms, cycle stands, billiard tables and gaming facilities, because programmers spend a lot of time working. And what they would want to do is, when they take a break, they want to give them an actual break in terms of not being stressed and being away from work. So there are activity areas created in organizations like Google, Microsoft, and this is the place where the organization is looking after the welfare of the employee, that you are mentally, physically fit and are able to accommodate the requirements if you work long hours, or if you need any specific resources, and that will be covered under welfare. Then we look at compliance. Compliance is clear. We look at law in this case. There are requirements which have to be fulfilled, and these requirements have to be fulfilled from a point of view of minimum wage to be provided, number of hours which the employee can work, contract to be given, and benefits which the employees can take, or if the employers, for example, are not giving those benefits, those are the bits which will come under employment law. And here in the UK in particular, and not so different in Australia, there's a minimum wage act. That means when people work, that is the minimum wage has to be given. The contract has to be issued, some bit of basic facilities have to be provided to the employees, and they will all be complying with the law, because these are guidelines which are set in laws as acts by the government to ensure that employees should be treated fairly by their employer. And then we look at strategic aspect, which I've explained in the first slide, is that sometimes when, in an organization which has been running for a number of years, and you have a new competitor on the block which comes up, and what they do is they start poaching or taking your employees. You feel that organization is seeing an exodus, that a lot of people are leaving the organization, and there could be various reasons. So in some cases, management starts a review to say, can we look at reviewing the pay scale for our general managers or area sales managers? Because the pay has not risen for the last 5 years, 10 years, although the circumstances in the market would have changed, but this pay review has not been done. And if we see a lot of people leaving, then the top management will take a decision and ask HR to do a strategic payroll review to see if there is enough increment that we are giving as compared to our competitors. Is the salary structure and the bandwidth that we have in terms of bands for the salary, are they competitive as compared to the market and other companies which they are paying right now to their employees? And this kind of a review, which will be a pay review, would be a strategic part of HRM, because this is something which is constituted or done, say, once in 5 years or once in 10 years. And this is to help bring the company's expectation and the role in line with what other players are doing in the market. And that would be strategic nature of, looking at HR. Sometimes you would also see HR professionals are a part and parcel of the top management. If the company is looking at moving into a different direction in terms of business model or product strategy, then you would generally see HR is also included in that, in those meetings, in that part of it, because at some stage they would be required. When I say they, I mean the department is going to be required to augment, recruit new staff, which is going to help drive that strategy. So strategic integration of HR with other departments like marketing, leadership, and in general management are quite important. Then we look at the cost. There's a concept which is called human capital development. What is a HCD, as we call it, human capital development? This is the cost which the company has to invest in terms of training its resources. If you are sent on a course, you're asked to do a course, and if one employee has been asked at some stage, some of the other employees in the same department, same function will also be required to do it. So in this case, the company needs to look at what is called the cost of development. That means trainings that have to be done or have to be paid for. And in some cases, what they will also be looking at is developing skills and competencies which are required by the new staff to be able to work and deliver on objectives. In those cases, you generally see any type of costs which are spent that cannot be recouped. That means cannot be recovered by the company, is basically going to be covered under the heading of human capital development. That would mean that you are looking at spending, as I mentioned an example earlier, that on an average in this sector, as per the report in the UK, most organizations in travel, hospitality, and management spend up to £3,560 on training the employees. And if the employee ends up leaving, this cost cannot be recovered. So this cost of training and development generally tends to be HCD, or human cost of development in HRM. One last term that we look at is forecasting. Now, forecasting is a term which generally is used in a lot of connotations. Forecasting primarily the weather, forecasting revenues, forecasting inventory. If you're a merchandising planner, you will forecast the sale of a particular product, the inventory that you need to carry. So when you look at forecasting, it is basically a process in which we make predictions based on past and present data. So forecasting in HRM is also important because of the fact that it is going to use some historical data on, say, recruitment and selection, on payroll, or how the employees or employee status or benefits have changed over the years, and then we'll benchmark and predict something for the future, that this is what we need to do in order to retain employees. So forecasting is also done when a company is expanding, or when there are things which are dynamic within the organization and workforce is being expanded. You generally see HR will also be tasked with the process of doing a bit of forecasting. That means how many employees would we need, what is the headcount, how much we need to spend to increase the headcount from, say, 100 to 200, and what are the skill sets which are lacking in our organization, and if we have to get to acquire these skill sets, can we do in-house training, can we get them from outside? Those kind of things that you look at in terms of developing, working, and implementing plans for future requirements of how the company would need people, and people to be working in those roles within the organization would be the process of forecasting. Is that okay? Any
Yep.
questions on this so far?
None so far.
All right, okay. Now let's look at going into some of the assessment criteria. There are only two in this learning outcome. One of them talks about explaining the key operational areas of human resource management. So what are the key operational areas that we've discussed? We've discussed key operational areas, which are recruitment and selection, creation of job design or job descriptions. We've looked at training and development. We've looked at performance management, and we've looked at compensation benefits or rewards and benefits. These are the key areas which you would generally see: employee relation, compliance with law and regulation. These are the key areas that you would generally see the HR would operate in. What is the role of HR? The role of HR is to ensure that they have the right talent in the right place at the right time to meet the business objectives. If you don't have the right people with the right skill set to perform the job, then you would generally see the business would suffer, the targets would not be achieved, or the employees will be demotivated, or generally you would see there will be no passion to going after the objectives which are set by the leadership of the top management within the organization. And in order for them, when I say in order for the organization to achieve the objectives, goals which are set, you would generally see that the HR would be dealing with these core areas: recruitment and selection, tweaking the design or the description of your job. Sometimes what happens is, I'll give you an example. What do you mean by job design and job analysis? If I see that a person is doing, let's say, as an example, if I say that we've had a sales manager in the company, who has been with us for about 5 years. Now, what is his function? What is his role? What does he do on a day-to-day basis? His main role is he looks after fielding, inquiries. He sends across maybe quotations or, contracts to the new customers. He looks after developing new customers. He does a lot of prospecting by doing cold calling or newsletters or emails to, prospective customers. And his main role has been to look at developing business. That means, how does the company get business and revenue? The sales manager is responsible for getting that, because at the end of the day, if the sales does not happen, the employees and the payroll does not work, and then the company does not make money. So if in 5 years, if the job description has not changed, but the market has moved, for example, the market, their competitors have got now, for example, implemented a software for making some of the bits that the person does easier. Things like requesting a quotation or maintaining a database of customer details, looking at generating a PO. And if all of this was being done manually by the sales manager, look at how much time this would have been eating up into his role to be able to go out and meet new customers. Now, if the competitors have moved on and have employed software to be able to do this, the HR role here would be to redesign the aspects of the job to say, okay, we are looking at taking this particular, HRM base, and what we are going to do is, with this CRM that we are going to employ as a software, this will help you do some of your functions much better or much quicker and much efficient way. And that would mean that your job description would change. You would not need to make manual codes or call the customers manually, but all of this would now be documented in the Salesforce CRM, and that would allow everyone, including your manager, your boss, or the other people within the organization, to see things seamlessly. And that would be the role of HR, to redesign the job or rewrite the job role so that it is in line with today's requirement, rather than something which is old and not in line, or maybe not very productive, considering the developments which have happened in the market and how the competition is moving ahead with employability in terms of employing new softwares and tools and techniques to make working more efficient. So here you are going to be looking at covering some of the important functions which I have listed down here, and we've discussed them in a bit more detail. You can do this through a table, just as an example, and this is briefly defining the functions. Now, because the task says explain, what you will need to do is, after covering some of these functions theoretically, maybe stitch a small example in what do you mean by recruitment selection? So recruitment selection, in this case, you could give out an example saying that my employer has placed out a vacancy for a receptionist and they have advertised this particular job role. And that would be looking at giving an example of the operational function of HR within the organization. You might not need to do it for all of them, but maybe do a table which basically explains some of the main functions. And then for one or two of them, you give an example to explain how the HR operational role works within an organization. Is that okay?
Yes.
Now, in the second assessment criteria, we're looking at key strategic functions of human resources management. The first part of the assessment criteria talked about the word, note the word, it says operational functions, which are day-to-day routine functions which the people in human resources department, somebody who works within an HR department would do. But in the second part of the task, it talks about strategic functions. The word operational has changed to strategic. So here, when we look at strategic functions of HR, we are going to be looking at dwelling into these areas, which are workforce planning, talent management, diversity and inclusion, and they would essentially be, strategic functions that we would get to see, from a point of view of HR. Now, there are other functions. So I've done a table, but there are other functions which also could mean that you're looking at, engagement. Sometimes what happens within organization is that there are lots of people working, but they don't work in teams. They work in isolation. There is very little engagement or enablement by the organization to be able to ensure that people talk to each other, departments interact with each other, they contribute and work in tandem to be able to deliver for the objectives. So here, sometimes when we talk about engagement, what we are looking at is sometimes you would see strategically the organization would create employee events. What are these events? One of the events could be an yearly employers conference. So all employees from all branch offices, everybody is called and they are asked to participate in a 2-day training session or an employee conference which is happening. There could be rewards which are given out, trophies which are given out, recognition is being done for employees which have contributed significantly for the organization in that year. That would be seen as employer or employee engagement. You would also see sometimes, there are some activities or events which employers do or department heads do. What they'll do is one of the days they'll say, okay, the team is not working well. There are some issues, frictions. The department head takes a call and what they will do is, okay, they'll decide, let's do a half a day out today as an activity. He'll take them out for dinner or you'll go out and do an activity for team bonding. And that would be seen as employee welfare, employee engagement, so that the department head is informally trying to see where are the issues and how he can increase cooperative working amongst his staff to be able to achieve certain objectives and remove any friction, if any, or issues, deal with issues, if any, and that would be done through the process of employee engagement. Surveys, questionnaires are another example. Feedback questionnaires or surveys are another example of how engagement is done. Sometimes if the company introduces a new policy, you would see that the company would also serve a survey which everyone needs to undertake to understand if they like the policy and the changes that have been introduced. If not, you would generally see that in some cases, employers would also use the forms to be able to then, get feedback and suggestions in order to make changes to that policy and its implementation. And that would be seen as employee engagement by the organization. And then you can dwell into some of these because we have covered some part of this in detail here. And they are what are called strategic parts of the HR function, which HR would do. Forecasting will fall here or in operational function. What do you think? When I say forecasting, will it fall into strategic or operational? Any ideas?
Forecasting.
Yeah, will fall into strategic.
Strategic.
That's good. Yeah, it'll be strategic function.
Yeah.
We look at human capital development, it'll be strategic function. So in those cases, you're looking at essentially, taking some examples here and then covering this assessment criteria. Now, the last one here talks about discuss the relationship between business strategy and human resources strategy. Now, this is where it comes into play when we talk about the relationship between, what is the role of HR and what is the role of HR in the overall scheme of things for business. So what I've done here is I would explain this through the route of an example. And that example I've taken across is for Marriott hotels. Now, if you are if you imagine that you are maybe one of the key members in the leadership team in Marriott, what you would be always looking at is that how do I make the business more, let's say, friendly and operational, and also, a business model that I employ, which will make, things easier for, the people working within different departments, different places. So here, what will happen is, as a person in the management position, your role will be to look at understanding areas of gap, which are going to be areas which can be improved, and thereby improving the overall performance of the company. So if we imagine Marriott as a hotel, Marriott is a very big hotel chain globally. They have over 4,000 properties across the globe. At any given point in time, one of the key decisions which the chief executive needs to look at is what is the room vacant capacity, or what is the total capacity of the hotels that he has, total capacity of guests which can stay, and how much of that is being utilized at any given point in time. So his main idea of looking at 4,000 properties, maybe each property has maybe 200 rooms. So in excess of 80 to 100,000 rooms if they have, then what is the company's strategy to look at making sure that these rooms are not empty, they are occupied throughout the year? That means they're generating revenue and business. So here in this case, the strategy would be to look at, one, expanding into a location wherein there is growth happening in the tourism sector. So there are countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Africa, certain countries, India in particular, Dubai, Middle East. There are places where there is an explosion happening in tourism. People want to go to these countries because they want to experience nature or events, or be a part and parcel of that particular side of geography. Now, one is the company would look at whether it has properties or hotels in that location or not. Now, if it doesn't have properties or hotels in that location, first thing which the leadership would decide is how do we look at creating a footprint. They would then look at either we buy a hotel, or we start constructing one, or we take over a chain, which then can be rebranded as Marriott Hotels. So in these cases, what you will generally see is that you would need to have a business strategy in place. And that business strategy, one second. So in these cases, what you will generally see is that the business, at the end of the day, the head of the management of the business would be looking at how do we get a presence of Marriott hotels in that location. Now that is the business strategy, because they feel that if they are not in that geography or in that location, they are missing out on the revenue or the turnover or the experience that they can provide to their customers if Marriott hotel chain was present. Now, once they decide that we need to have a footprint or we need to have a presence in this location, at some stage, the management would give the task to the HR department to say, okay, we have now started the plans to either take over a company which has this property with so many locations, or we are looking at building a hotel in this location, which will be completed in 1 year's time. And what we need to be able to do is staff that property at the end of it once the hotel is ready. So what will happen in that case? The strategic part of the business would give out a detailed planning to HR to say, that's the process. In 6 months' time, this will be ready. 9 months' time, this will be ready. Now is the time that you need to start putting things into action, to start looking at recruitment and selection, start looking at shortlisting people, and making sure that we have people available to start and run the property and the business by such and such time. So if they start construction on the 1st of January and they expect the construction to finish by 30th of December, and they want the new property to start functioning, to start, inviting guests and taking bookings from, say, 30th of January next year, then the HR department would need to swing into action, and they will work very closely with the business side of things to ensure that after 6 months, when the infrastructure is ready, things are looking or to moving towards finishing side, then they start recruiting, start training, and start doing other functions which are required, so that when the hotel completely is finished and ready and handover is done, they should have manpower ready to be able to take on different roles working within that particular location. So this relation of close working between business strategy and Marriott HR department, which could be a central HR department or a head office department, would essentially be seen as a close relationship to ensure the success of that property and the launch of that venture in that location. And this is what we need to understand when we talk about relationship between business and HR. So business team will create the strategy, look at location, look at the expansion in a particular geography, and then they will at some stage involve HR to say start recruiting, start selecting people who are going to essentially work within that place, and that would then show that there is a closer working between business department and the key management and the HR department, because there is a commitment from the business to the HR side to say, once the property is ready, you need to have people to be able to start working in that location. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so with this, we finished this particular learning outcome, and we will be looking at learning outcome 3 in the next session. So what I would want to do now is just look at you giving us some, come back to me, and then if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. But at the end, what I would also say is give us an indication in terms of what dates or days are available next week, so that we can plan the delivery of learning outcome 3 and learning outcome 4 for this unit.
Okay. I'll just send an email to the one that you gave yesterday.
Sure.
For my availability for next week. So for next, is it okay if it's for next week?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Nicole.
Yeah. So for next